The folder hit the marble countertop so hard that the sound echoed through the entire kitchen. Vera Calloway, 36 years old, director of the Calloway Family Trust and wife of Edmund Page, did not flinch. She had spent 11 years learning not to flinch. Edmund Page, 41 years old, chief operating officer of Page Meridian Capital, stood at the opposite end of the kitchen island with his jaw set and his eyes hard. The folder was still spinning slightly on the marble. Papers had slid out from the edge, financial documents, from the look of them, and Vera could see her own name printed at the top of one of them. She didn't reach for it. "You want to explain this?" Edmund said. She looked at him evenly. "I don't know what that is." "You don't know what that is," he said it slowly, like he was tasting each word for poison. "Vera, your signature is on 4 wire transfers that I have never seen, totaling $1.2 million. She took a step toward the counter. He put his hand on the folder before she could reach it. "Don't," he said. She stopped, looked at his hand, then looked at his face. There was something there she recognized but couldn't quite name, not just anger, something rehearsed, like he had practiced this exact expression. "Edmund, let me see what you're talking about." "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." The housekeeper, a quiet woman named Dolores, who had worked for them for 6 years, appeared briefly in the doorway, read the room in less than a second, and disappeared again without a word. Vera heard the back door click softly shut. Later, she would think about that moment. She would think about the fact that Dolores, who had known her for 6 years and known Edmund for 3, had left, not stayed. Left, but that was later. Right now, she was standing in the kitchen she had designed herself, in the house she had paid for with money from a trust she had managed since she was 28 years old, and her husband was holding documents that bore her name, documents she had never signed, and looking at her like she was a stranger he had never trusted. "I want to see those papers," she said again. He picked up the folder and walked out of the kitchen. She stood there for a long moment. Then she went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened her laptop. She had access to all of the trust's financial accounts. She had managed them for 8 years without a single discrepancy. When she pulled up the wire transfer logs, there were 4 transactions she did not recognize, dated within the last 90 days, each one routed to a vendor account she had never set up, each one bearing a digital authorization signature that matched her credentials. She stared at the screen for a long time, then she picked up her phone and called the trust's outside counsel. He didn't answer. She called again in the morning. He answered that time, but his voice was careful in a way it had never been before. Measured, distant, like a man talking around something he had already decided not to say. "Vera," he said, "I think you need to be aware that the board of directors received a formal complaint yesterday regarding misappropriation of trust funds." She sat very still. "From whom?" A pause. "It came from inside the organization." She already knew, but she asked anyway. "Edmund filed it?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm not in a position to discuss the specifics. I would strongly recommend you retain independent counsel. Today, if possible." He ended the call before she could say anything else. She sat in her car in the parking garage beneath their building for 45 minutes without moving. She thought about the 4 wire transfers. She thought about the vendor accounts she had never set up. She thought about her digital credentials, stored on her work laptop, which she kept in her home office, which Edmund had access to. She thought about the folder he had slammed onto the counter with such precise, practiced fury. She thought about Simone. Simone Arquette was 30 years old and worked in investor relations at Page Meridian Capital. Vera had met her exactly twice, once at an office holiday party 2 years ago and once at a charity auction Edmund had dragged her to last spring. Both times Simone had been perfectly polite in a way that was almost too calibrated, the kind of polite that leaves no fingerprints. Vera had noticed. She had filed it away somewhere quiet and tried not to open the drawer. She opened it now. She thought about the late nights Edmund had started keeping 6 months ago. The business trips that were always just a little too vague in their details. Cities without hotel names, meetings without colleagues she could verify. She thought about the way he had started standing in doorways rather than entering rooms when she was in them. Like he was always keeping his exit clear. She told herself she was being paranoid. She was good at telling herself that. She drove back to the apartment, went directly to her home office, and began going through every file she had access to. Not just the trust accounts, everything. Her email history, her credential logs, every document that bore her digital signature going back 18 months. The first irregularity she found was in the payroll extension records. The trust operated a small staff, 7 employees, all of whom she knew personally. But 3 months ago, a new name had appeared in the payroll system, attached to an executive compensation tier she had never authorized. The name meant nothing to her, but the banking details attached to the account routed to the same institution as one of the 4 fraudulent wire transfers. She kept looking. By midnight, she had found 11 separate anomalies, hidden vendor accounts, inflated expense reports filed under her authorization, 2 contracts bearing her digital signature for services the trust had never received. Everything had been done carefully, incrementally, spread across just enough time to avoid triggering the automatic audit flags she had set up herself. Someone had studied her system. Someone who knew it well. She made a cup of coffee, sat at her desk, and wrote down everything she had found in longhand: names, dates, account numbers, the specific routing codes. She cross-referenced each one against her own calendar to confirm she had been nowhere near her laptop on the days the authorizations had been processed. On 4 of the 11 dates, she had been out of the city entirely. She had receipts, hotel confirmations, flight records. She took photographs of her screen with her personal phone. Then she backed everything up to an external drive she kept in her bag. Then she called her sister. Delphine Calloway was 32 years old and worked as a forensic accountant at a firm in Chicago. They hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. A small disagreement over nothing that had somehow stretched into silence the way small things do in families. When Vera called at 12:15 in the morning, Delphine answered on the second ring and didn't ask a single question about the hour. "Tell me what you have," she said. Vera told her. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Delphine said, "You have flight records for all 4 of the primary dates?" "All 4. And the routing codes all go back to the same originating institution?" "3 of them do. The 4th routes through a different bank, but the registered business name on the account was created 8 months ago. I can't find any operating history for it." "Send me everything," Delphine said. "Tonight. All of it." Vera sent it. She didn't sleep. She sat in her office with the door closed and went through every contact she had made in 11 years of managing the trust. Board members, financial advisors, the attorneys who had helped her structure the charitable giving programs. She thought about who she could call, who she could trust, who had a reason to help her, and no reason to be already in Edmund's corner. The list was shorter than she wanted it to be. At 6:15 in the morning, Edmund knocked once on the office door and opened it without waiting for an answer. He was already dressed, tie knotted perfectly. He stood in the doorway, keeping his exit clear. She noticed again and looked at her for a moment without speaking. "The board is meeting tomorrow," he said. "I think you should prepare yourself." "For what exactly?" "For the fact that this is going to come out." He said it gently, almost carefully, like he was delivering news he regretted. "I'm sorry, Vera. I don't know how it got to this point." She looked at him, really looked at him. At the practiced regret in his expression, at the way his hands were relaxed at his sides, no tension anywhere in his body. This was not the posture of a man who had been awake all night struggling with a terrible decision. This was the posture of a man who had already made his decision a long time ago and was simply executing it. "Edmund," she said quietly, "how long have you known about those wire transfers?" He hesitated. "Just briefly. "A few weeks. And you waited until now to bring them to me." "I was trying to understand what I was looking at." "You were trying to understand what you were looking at," she repeated, "for a few weeks. And during those few weeks, did you ever consider that someone might have used my credentials without my knowledge?" Something shifted in his face. So slight she would have missed it if she hadn't been watching for exactly that. "Of course I considered it. But you filed the complaint before you asked me." He didn't answer. She turned back to her desk. "Thank you for letting me know about the meeting." He stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he left. She waited until she heard the front door close. Then she called Delphine.
"I found it,"
Delphine said before Vera could speak. "The shell company, the one with no operating history. It was registered in Delaware 8 months ago." "You want to know who the registered agent is?" Vera closed her eyes. "Tell me." "A firm called Arquette Advisory Services. Sole proprietor listed as one Simone Arquette." Vera was quiet for a moment, then, "Send me the registration documents, already on their way." A pause. "Vera, this is deliberate. This isn't a mistake or a coincidence. Someone built this specifically to look like you. I know. You need to go to the authorities before Edmund does. If he gets there first with his version of events, I know." She had been thinking about nothing else for 6 hours. "I need one more thing from you. The payroll account, the phantom employee. Can you trace where those payments actually went after they left the trust? Give me until noon." She gave her until noon. In the meantime, she got dressed, drove to the trust's main office, and requested a full audit log from the IT department. She framed it as a routine security review. The IT coordinator, a young man named Terence, who had worked there for 2 years and genuinely liked his job, pulled the logs without question and left her alone in the server room with a printed report and a cup of coffee. She spent 2 hours with the logs. What she found was worse than she had expected, and she had expected something bad. The phantom authorizations hadn't just been made from her laptop. They had been made specifically during Windows when she was confirmed to be away from the office. Whoever had done this had access to her calendar. They had timed every single transaction to a period when her whereabouts could be independently verified, which would have been exculpatory, except that the presence of her credentials made it look like she had been trying to create an alibi rather than actually having one. It was sophisticated, it was methodical, and it had taken time. She thought about the business trips, the late nights, the vague meetings in cities without hotel names. She thought about how long Edmund had been building this, and she felt something cold settle in her chest that wasn't quite grief, and wasn't quite anger, and wasn't quite fear, but was somehow all three at once. Delphine called at 11:47. The payroll payments went into a holding account, she said. The holding account made 3 outbound transfers. 2 of them went to Arquette Advisory Services. The third one, she paused. The third one went to a personal account. I had to dig for this, Vera. They tried to obscure it. Whose account? Edmund's. Personal checking. Not his business accounts, his personal checking. The one neither of you has used since you opened a joint account 4 years ago. The line was quiet. Vera, I'm here. Do you want me to come to Atlanta? She thought about it. Not yet. Get me a notarized copy of everything you've found. Every document, every routing trace, every corporate registration record. I need it as clean and as official as you can make it. When do you need it? The board meets tomorrow morning. I'll drive it down myself. She ended the call and sat for a moment in the server room with the audit logs spread across the table in front of her. Through the frosted glass partition, she could see the trust's staff moving through their morning, answering phones, reviewing files, doing their jobs. 7 people who had worked for her in good faith. 7 people whose paychecks came from an organization that was about to be dragged through an investigation because someone had decided she was dispensable. She thought about each of them by name. She thought about their families, their mortgages, their health insurance. She gathered the audit logs, thanked Terence on her way out, and drove home. Edmund was there when she arrived. He wasn't alone. Seated at the kitchen table with him was a woman Vera had met once at a Sunday dinner 2 years ago. Edmund's mother, Rosalind Page, 71 years old and formidably composed, who had looked at Vera across the table that afternoon with the particular expression of a woman who has already decided that someone is temporary. Rosalind looked up when Vera walked in. Her expression now was not unkind, exactly. It was simply final. Vera, she said, please sit down. Vera remained standing. I'd rather not. A small silence. Edmund tells me there's been a serious concern raised about the management of the trust, Rosalind said. Edmund is mistaken about the nature of that concern. Rosalind folded her hands on the table. The board has a fiduciary responsibility. I know what the board's responsibilities are, Vera said. I've been managing the trust for 8 years. I've grown its assets by 31% and expanded its charitable programs into 4 new counties. I know its fiduciary responsibilities better than anyone in this room. Rosalind looked at Edmund. Edmund looked at the table. The documents, Rosalind began, are fabricated, Vera said. I have evidence of that. I have an independent forensic review already underway, and I have documentation that will be presented to the board tomorrow morning, before the meeting begins. She looked at Edmund. You should have talked to me first. He met her eyes. For just a moment, something flickered there, something that might have been uncertainty, or might have been the ghost of the person he used to be. Then it was gone. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said. She picked up her bag. No, she said quietly. You thought you were doing the easy thing. Those aren't the same. She went upstairs, packed a bag, and drove to her sister's hotel room, where Delphine had already arrived with 3 inches of notarized documentation and a box of takeout Thai food. They stayed up until 3 in the morning. By the time the board meeting convened at 9 the next morning, Vera had already delivered a full evidentiary packet to each of the 6 board members' personal email addresses. Forensic audit findings, corporate registration records, IT access logs, bank routing traces, Edmund's personal checking account records obtained through the forensic firm Delphine's colleagues had subpoenaed overnight. She sat at the head of the conference table. Her conference table, in her office, in the building her trust had occupied for 23 years, and she watched the board members read. Edmund arrived 12 minutes late. He stopped when he saw her seated at the head of the table. He stopped when he saw the documents in front of each board member. He stopped when he saw his mother standing near the window with an expression that had finally, for the first time since Vera had known her, lost its composure entirely. Vera, he said. Please sit down, Edmund, she said, and her voice was very calm. He sat. The board chair, a woman named Augusta Trent, who had known Vera for 6 years and known the trust for 20, looked up from the packet in front of her. "The forensic review is conclusive?" she asked. "My sister's firm filed the formal report this morning," Vera said. "The digital credentials used for the fraudulent transfers were accessed from a device registered to this address." She slid a sheet across the table. "That device has never been issued to me. It was registered to the Trust's network 11 months ago as a secondary administrative terminal. I never requested a secondary terminal. I never authorized one." Augusta looked at the sheet. Then she looked at Edmund. Edmund was looking at his hands. "The device IP maps to the home Wi-Fi network at the address Edmund and I share," Vera continued. "The transactions were executed during time windows when I was confirmed absent from the city. All 4 primary transfer dates correspond to travel I can document with flight records and hotel receipts that were booked through the Trust's own travel management system, meaning the dates are third-party verified, not self-reported." The room was very quiet. "The shell company used to receive the transfers is registered to Simone Arquette, who is currently employed in investor relations at Page Meridian Capital, where Edmund serves as chief operating officer." She paused. "Subsequent routing traces show that a portion of the transferred funds made their way into a personal checking account in Edmund's name." She placed the final document on the table and slid it toward the center. "I did not steal from the Trust," she said. "The Trust is my life's work. I would like the board to proceed accordingly." Augusta Trent removed her glasses and set them on the table. She looked at Edmund for a long moment. Edmund said nothing. There was nothing to say. What happened next happened with the kind of institutional thoroughness that Vera had spent 8 years building into the Trust's own governance structures. The board voted unanimously to retain outside legal counsel. Edmund was placed on administrative leave from his role, not at the Trust, but at Page Meridian Capital, whose own board was notified within the hour. Simone Arquette resigned by email before noon, an action that, according to the attorney Augusta retained, constituted an implicit admission that was going to make the subsequent civil proceedings considerably less complicated. Rosalind Page left the building without speaking to anyone. Vera sat in her office after everyone else had gone. The afternoon light came through the windows at an angle and fell across the framed photographs on the wall. The Trust's charitable partners, the community programs, the ribbon cuttings and the grant presentations, and the 7 staff members who had shown up this morning and done their jobs without knowing what was happening around them. She thought about 11 years. She thought about the way trust gets built so slowly and lost so fast, and she thought about how she had spent so long being careful not to flinch that she had sometimes forgotten she was allowed to. She opened her laptop and pulled up the Trust's financial dashboard. 31% growth over 8 years, 4 new counties, 47 partner organizations. She looked at the numbers for a long time. Then she opened a new document and began writing a letter to the staff. Not about the investigation, not yet, that would come in time with appropriate legal guidance and more words than she had tonight. Just a letter telling them that the Trust was sound, that their jobs were secure, and that she was grateful for their work. She wrote it, plain language, no legalese, no hedging. She signed it with her full name. 3 weeks later, the criminal referral went to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Edmund's attorney put forward a cooperation offer within 48 hours of receiving the filing. Simone Arquette retained separate counsel and began her own cooperation discussions shortly after that. Vera did not follow the legal proceedings closely. She had attorneys for that. What she did instead was go back to work. She restructured the Trust's credential security protocols, something she should have done years earlier and hadn't, because she had trusted the people around her and trust had felt like enough. She hired a permanent internal auditor, a position she had always considered optional and now understood was not. She expanded the whistleblower protections for Trust staff and made it explicitly clear, in writing, in a policy document that now lived in every employee's onboarding packet, that concerns about financial management should be reported to the board's independent audit committee rather than to any single administrator, including her. She made the Trust harder to steal from. She made it harder to run too, in the way that the right things are often harder, more accountable, more transparent, more resilient. In the middle of all of this, she got a call from an attorney she had never heard of, based in a firm in Savannah that specialized in estate and trust administration. "Mrs. Calloway," the attorney said, "my name is Theodore Marsh. I represent the estate of Harriet Calloway Voss." Vera was quiet for a moment. Harriet Calloway Voss had been her grandmother's older sister. She had died 6 months ago at 91, in a house in coastal Georgia that Vera had visited exactly once at the age of 9 and remembered mostly as a place full of old books and tall windows and a garden that seemed to go on forever. "I wasn't notified of the estate proceedings," Vera said. "No," Theodore Marsh said. You weren't. That was deliberate on Miss Calloway Voss's instructions. A pause. She was a private woman. She'd specific wishes about how the estate was to be communicated and to whom and when. She asked that we wait 6 months after her death before making contact. We honored that request. Vera sat down. What does the estate involve? There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Are you somewhere you can speak privately, Miss Calloway? She was in her office. She got up and closed the door. Yes, the Calloway Voss estate, Theodore Marsh said carefully, includes a primary residence in Savannah, several investment properties in coastal Georgia and South Carolina, and a controlling stake in a private wealth management firm called Voss Meridian Holdings. Another pause. The firm manages approximately $2.4 billion in assets under management. Vera did not speak. Mrs. Calloway Voss had no children, the attorney continued. Her husband predeceased her by 17 years. She spent the last 30 years of her life building Voss Meridian Holdings from a small regional firm into what it is today. She was, by her own preference, almost entirely unknown outside of a small professional circle. She was not a public figure. She gave no interviews. She preferred it that way. He paused once more. She also, apparently, followed your career closely for the last 8 years. She was aware of your work with the Calloway Family Trust. She was aware of recent events. Vera's voice, when it finally came, was very quiet. She knew? She knew everything that was public record, and a few things that weren't. Theodore Marsh sounded for the first time almost warm. She said, and I'm quoting from a letter she left for you directly. She said that she had watched you handle difficult things with more grace than she had managed at your age, and that the firm needed someone who understood that an institution's worth is measured by what it protects, not what it accumulates. Vera pressed her palm flat against the surface of her desk. The wood was cool and solid under her hand. The controlling stake, she said slowly. She's leaving it to me. She left it to you, Theodore Marsh said. The estate has already transferred. You have been the controlling stakeholder of Voss Meridian Holdings for 6 months. We simply hadn't told you yet. Later, much later, after the meetings with the Savannah attorneys and the introduction to the Voss Meridian board and the first quiet walk through Harriet Calloway Voss's house with its tall windows and its garden that still seemed to go on forever. A journalist who was writing a profile of the firm asked Vera what she considered the turning point. She thought about the question for a long time before she answered. She didn't say. The moment Edmund threw that folder. She didn't say. The moment Delphine answered the phone at 12:15 in the morning without asking why. She didn't say. The moment she sat in the server room and understood exactly what had been done to her and decided that understanding it was more important than being destroyed by it. What she said was, I stopped waiting for someone to tell me I was allowed to be in the room. The journalist wrote it down. Vera looked out the window of the Savannah office, her office now in a building that had stood for 40 years on a quiet street downtown, full of people doing careful, serious work with other people's futures, and she thought about the 9-year-old version of herself standing in a garden that seemed to go on forever, not knowing yet what she was walking toward. She thought about that for a while. Then she went back to work.